All right, so you know how it is? You think you kind of have a grasp on how things work, especially in a city as crazy as New York, right? And then, boom, out of nowhere, something totally unexpected comes along and throws everything for a loop.
Yeah, totally. And this past week, it felt like the entire legal world was watching this one case unfold, the one with Mayor
Oh,
Adams.
yeah, front page news for sure.
Big time. And, Wednesday, April 2nd, 2025, that was a huge day because that's when federal judge Dale Ho, he officially dismissed those corruption charges that have been kind of hanging over Mayor Adams' head for what feels like forever.
Yeah, you and I were just talking before we started recording, like, wow, this feels like it's been going on for years.
Right. And it's not just that the charges were dismissed. It's how it all went down. That's got everyone talking.
Exactly, and that's what this whole deep dive is about. You've been poring over all these news articles about Judge Ho's decision.
My eyes are crossed.
I bet, and we really want to go beyond just the headlines. We got to get into the nitty-gritty of what this dismissal really means, the motivations behind it, all the different players involved, and what the ripple effects might be, because, this is going to have consequences.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I think the most important thing to understand right off the bat is that Judge Ho didn't just dismiss the case, he dismissed it with prejudice. And that little legal phrase, that's the key to this whole thing.
So break it down for us with prejudice. What's that all about in plain English?
Basically, it means this case with these specific charges against Mayor Adams, it's over. It's done. They can't ever bring it back. It's like a legal knockout punch, no rematch.
Wow, so that's a pretty definitive ending then.
It is. And what makes it even more interesting is that it wasn't exactly what the Trump administration's Justice Department was hoping for.
Right, because if I remember correctly, there were 5 counts in the original indictment against Mayor Adams.
Yeah, you get 5 counts alleging all sorts of shady stuff like taking improper benefits, accepting illegal campaign contributions, even trying to cover some of it up, all going back to his time as Brooklyn Borough president.
And he pleaded not guilty to all of those charges, right?
Correct. He denied any wrongdoing from the very beginning.
So the Trump DOJ steps in and says, hey, let's drop this whole thing, which on the surface might sound reasonable, but there was a catch, wasn't there?
A big one. They wanted the case dismissed without prejudice, which means they could theoretically bring those same charges back later if they wanted to.
So it's like they wanted to keep that option open just in case.
Exactly, like a little insurance policy.
But Judge Ho said, nope, not going to happen. He insisted on with prejudice. So why do you think he made that call? What was his reasoning?
Well, in his ruling, Judge Ho specifically said that he was worried about how things would look if he dismissed the case without prejudice, especially since, at the same time, the administration was asking Mayor Adams to cooperate with them on immigration policies.
So it would look kind of shady, like maybe there was a deal going on.
Exactly like the mayor's legal problems were being used as leverage to get him to play ball on immigration. And Judge Ho didn't want the mayor to seem like he was beholden to the federal government, instead of to the people of New York City.
So he was trying to avoid even the appearance of a quid pro quo?
Exactly. He wanted to make it crystal clear that this decision was about the law and nothing else.
And he didn't just hint at this idea of a possible deal. He straight up said, everything here smacks of a bargain.
Oh, yeah, he didn't hold back at all. He was clearly suspicious that there was some kind of unspoken agreement happening behind the scenes.
Wow. So what was the Justice Department's official excuse for wanting to drop the case in the first place? What were their arguments?
They had a few. They said the timing of the indictment so close to the election was an issue. They also claimed that the U.S. attorney who brought the charges had acted improperly.
Okay, so trying to discredit the prosecution's motives.
Yeah, and their third argument was that this whole prosecution was making it harder for Mayor Adams to help them with their immigration crackdown.
Interesting. So that ties back into that whole perception of a quid pro quo that Judge Ho was so concerned about.
It does. It really suggests that they saw the mayor's cooperation on immigration as more important than pursuing these corruption charges.
But it doesn't sound like Judge Ho bought any of their explanations.
Nope. He rejected all 3 arguments. He pretty much said that the timing and the allegations of impropriety were pretty weak excuses, especially when you consider the seriousness of the corruption charges.
This whole thing really raises some big questions about how much influence a president can have over the Justice Department.
Absolutely. It suggests that the Trump administration was willing to use prosecutorial power to advance their own agenda, particularly when it comes to immigration.
And we've seen this kind of shift in priorities under Trump, haven't we? Like the DOJ seems to be focusing more on immigration and less on going after public corruption.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely been a noticeable change, and Judge Ho called them out on it pretty forcefully.
What did he say exactly?
He said their reasoning was unprecedented and breathtaking in its sweep, and that it was basically unheard of for the DOJ to drop charges against an elected official just to push through their own policy goals.
Hmm.
He really made it clear that he thought this was a highly unusual and potentially inappropriate move.
So what was Mayor Adams's reaction to all of this? I'm sure he was pretty happy with the outcome.
Oh, yeah, he was definitely relieved. He went public and said he'd always maintained his innocence and that these charges never should have been brought against him.
Understandably, and I heard he made a point of holding up a certain book during his public statements. What was that about?
He did. He was promoting a book called Government Gangsters,
Mm-hmm.
written by Kash Patel, who, is now Trump's FBI director.
Yeah, I remember that appointment causing quite a stir.
For sure. And this book, it basically pushes the idea of a deep state conspiracy within the federal government.
So for those of us who aren't familiar with that whole theory, can you give us a quick rundown of what the deep state is supposed to be?
Basically, the deep state idea is that there's this hidden network of unelected officials, bureaucrats, deep within the government, who are secretly pulling the strings, controlling things, manipulating policy, often working against the elected leaders.
So they're like the puppet masters behind the scenes.
That's the idea. And Kash Patel, he's been a vocal critic of the Justice Department for a long time, claiming that they're biased against Trump and his allies. And his book argues that this deep state is actively trying to sabotage conservative agendas and target anyone who supports Trump.
So by holding up this book, Mayor Adams is basically signaling that he believes he was targeted by this so-called deep state, right?
Exactly. He's suggesting that these charges were politically motivated, an attempt to take him down because of his political affiliations.
Wow, this is getting deeper and deeper. It's like a political thriller unfolding in real time.
Right. And all this drama, it actually caused a huge rift within the Justice Department itself.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading about that. Like, there were some serious clashes between different groups of prosecutors.
It was a total mess. The news reports called it an extraordinary and bitter clash between the career prosecutors in Manhattan, the ones who originally brought the charges, and then the political appointees in the Trump DOJ, the ones who were pushing hard to get the case dismissed.
Sounds like a real power struggle.
It was, and there were even accusations of ethical misconduct flying back and forth. It got really ugly.
And it even led to some high-ranking officials resigning, right?
Yeah, some people just couldn't stomach it. Danielle R. Sassoon, she was the interim U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. She resigned rather than carry out the order to dismiss the case. And reportedly, a bunch of other career DOJ folks quit too. They were so disgusted with how this whole thing was being handled.
Wow. So even though the DOJ tried to paint the Manhattan prosecutors as the bad guys, Judge Ho didn't see it that way.
Nope, not at all. He said there was no evidence to suggest that those prosecutors had acted improperly. He actually pointed out that they had followed all the proper guidelines and procedures.
So that directly contradicts the DOJ's claim that they were trying to dismiss the case because of those prosecutors.
Exactly. It undermines their whole argument.
Let's talk about the timing of all this for a second. It feels like this dismissal came at a pretty crucial moment in the New York City mayoral race.
Yeah, it did. Judge Ho's decision came down just a few days before the deadline for candidates to submit their petitions to get on the ballot for the June primary.
So talk about a well-timed legal victory for Mayor Adams.
Right place, right time for sure. And he's already said that he's running for re-election and that he expects to win.
Well, with these charges out of the way, he's definitely in a much stronger position now.
Oh yeah, no doubt. But even though the legal cloud has lifted, there's still some uncertainty about his political future.
How so?
Well, there's a lot of talk about whether he'll stick with the Democrats or maybe try to run as an independent. There's a lot of anti-Trump sentiment in New York City. So running as a Democrat could be tricky after this whole thing with the DOJ and an independent run well that comes with its own set of challenges.
So lots of political maneuvering still to come.
Oh, yeah. This story is far from over.
No, I thought it was interesting that Judge Ho brought in an outside legal expert to weigh in on this case.
He did. He appointed Paul D. Clement, who's a very well-respected conservative lawyer. He's argued a ton of cases before the Supreme Court. He's the real deal.
And what did Mr. Clement recommend?
He specifically recommended that the case be dismissed with prejudice, just like Judge Ho ended up doing.
Interesting. So even though he's a conservative, he agreed that the case should be dismissed permanently.
Yeah. He basically argued that it was important to end the uncertainty surrounding Mayor Adams. He said having the possibility of charges hanging over his head would be like living with the proverbial sword of Damocles.
Makes sense. You wouldn't want that kind of pressure constantly looming over you.
Especially when you're trying to run a city.
So even though Judge Ho dismissed the case, he made it very clear that this wasn't a judgment on whether Mayor Adams was actually guilty or innocent, right?
Absolutely. He emphasized that he was only ruling on the way the Justice Department was trying to handle the dismissal, not on the merits of the charges themselves. He even reiterated that Mayor Adams is still presumed innocent under the law.
So it's like he was saying, hey, I'm not saying he did it or didn't do it. I'm just saying this case is over.
Exactly. He was drawing a clear line between the legal process and the question of guilt or innocence.
And in his final remarks, Judge Ho brought up some really important points about the justice system and the role of public opinion.
He stressed that ultimately the power to decide whether or not to pursue a prosecution belongs to the executive branch, the president and the attorney general. But he also pointed out that it's the public's judgment that really matters in the end.
Meaning that even if someone isn't convicted in court, they still have to answer to the people?
Exactly. Their reputation, their political career, those things can still be affected by public opinion.
Makes sense. And Judge Ho also had some strong words for the Justice Department's claim that they have almost unlimited power to drop cases.
Yeah, he called their assertion of virtually unreviewable discretion disturbing and argued that such a broad view of prosecutorial power could undermine the whole idea of equal justice under law.
Meaning that it could open the door to politically motivated decisions where some people get favored treatment while others get thrown under the bus.
Exactly, and that's a scary thought.
And even Reverend Al Sharpton weighed in on this, saying that the dismissal with prejudice was important because it removes the perception that Mayor Adams might be under the thumb of the White House.
Yeah, that's a good point. It helps to restore some of the mayor's independence in the eyes of the public.
All right, so let's try to sum this whole thing up. We had corruption charges against Mayor Adams. They were dismissed by a federal judge, and it was a with prejudice dismissal, which means those charges are gone for good. This one against the Trump Justice Department wanted. They were hoping for a dismissal that would let them bring those charges back later, and the judge pretty much said that he thought the DOJ was trying to use these charges as leverage to get the mayor to cooperate on immigration. He even used the word bargain.
Yeah, you hit all the key points there. It was a pretty wild ride.
And this whole ordeal, it really exposed some deep cracks in our justice system and how it interacts with politics. It raises some really uncomfortable questions about whether justice is truly blind or if it can be influenced by those in power.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder about the long-term consequences for the Justice Department's credibility. Will people trust them to be fair and impartial after this?
Right. And what about Mayor Adams? What does this mean for his political future? Will he be able to move past this, or will it continue to haunt him?
I guess we'll have to wait and see how it all plays out in the upcoming election.
One thing's for sure, though, this story is far from over, Bar. The legal battle may be finished, but the political and social ramifications are just beginning.
And for you, the listener, the real takeaway here is to think critically about the information you're consuming about this case and others. Don't just take things at face value. Question the motivations of those involved, consider the different perspectives, and always be on the lookout for potential biases.
Couldn't have said it better myself. All right, folks, that's a wrap on our deep dive into the Mayor Adams case. Thanks for joining us. And remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and keep those critical thinking skills sharp.